The starship Elysium glided silently through the inky blackness of space, its sleek hull reflecting the distant light of 1,000 suns. On board, Ambassador Kale Arvidsson stood at the observation deck, his sharp blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar star system. The planet below, Zorith, was a swirling mass of greens and blues, its atmosphere thick with clouds. Kale adjusted the collar of his formal uniform, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar. He had been chosen for this mission not just for his diplomatic skills, but for his unorthodox methods that had earned him both admiration and criticism back on Earth. The mission was simple: establish diplomatic relations with the Zorathians, a reclusive alien species known for their advanced technology and rigid societal hierarchy. The Zorathians had only recently opened their borders to outsiders, and Earth was eager to secure an alliance. Kale, however, had his doubts. The Zorathians were rumored to be cold and calculating, their emotions buried beneath layers of tradition and protocol. But Kale had always believed that beneath every mask lay a beating heart, and he was determined to find it. As the Elysium descended through Zoritha's atmosphere, Kale felt the familiar tug of gravity pulling him toward the planet's surface. The ship landed with a soft thud in the heart of the Zorathian capital, a sprawling city of towering spires and shimmering glass. Kale stepped off the ship, his boots crunching on the crystalline ground. A delegation of Zorathians awaited him, their tall, slender forms draped in flowing robes of silver and gold. Their faces were serene, their eyes glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. At the head of the delegation stood Princess Lyra, the youngest daughter of the Zorathian emperor. She was strikingly beautiful, her skin a pale shade of lavender, her hair a cascade of silvery threads that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her eyes, however, were cold and distant, betraying no emotion. Kale approached her, bowing slightly in the Earth custom. "Princess Lyra," he said, his voice steady. "I am Ambassador Kale Arvidsson of Earth. It is an honor to meet you." Lyra inclined her head, her expression unreadable. "Welcome to Zorith, Ambassador Arvidsson. We have been expecting you." The formalities were brief, and Kale was soon escorted to the grand hall of the Zorathian palace. The hall was a marvel of architecture, its walls adorned with intricate carvings and its ceiling a vast dome of stained glass that filtered the sunlight into a kaleidoscope of colors. Kale was seated at a long table, surrounded by Zorathian officials. The air was thick with tension, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The negotiations began, and Kale quickly realized that the Zorathians were as rigid as their reputation suggested. They spoke in measured tones, their words carefully chosen to avoid any hint of emotion. Kale, however, was not one to play by the rules. He interrupted their carefully rehearsed speeches with bold statements and probing questions, his voice cutting through the sterile atmosphere like a knife. "Why do you fear change?" he asked, his gaze locking onto Lyra's. "Your society is advanced, but it is also stagnant. You have so much to offer the galaxy, yet you hide behind your walls and your traditions. Why?" The room fell silent, the Zorathians staring at Kale in shock. Lyra's eyes narrowed, a flicker of emotion breaking through her icy facade. "You speak boldly, Ambassador," she said, her voice low. "But you do not understand our ways." "Then help me understand," Kale replied, his tone softening. "I am here not just as a diplomat, but as a bridge between our worlds. Let us build that bridge together." Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering to the other Zorathians before returning to Kale. For a moment, it seemed as though she might respond, but then she straightened, her expression hardening once more. "We will continue the negotiations tomorrow," she said, her voice cold. "You are dismissed." Kale rose from his seat, bowing slightly before turning to leave. As he walked out of the grand hall, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He had seen a crack in Lyra's armor, a glimpse of the person beneath the princess. And he was determined to break through. The next day, Kale was summoned to the palace gardens, a sprawling expanse of exotic plants and crystalline fountains. The air was filled with the scent of alien flowers, their petals shimmering in hues of blue and purple. Kale found Lyra standing by a fountain, her back to him as she gazed at the water. She turned as he approached, her expression unreadable. "Ambassador Arvidsson," she said, her voice calm. "I have been thinking about your words from yesterday. You claim to want to understand us, but you speak as though you already know what is best for us." Kale shook his head. "I don't presume to know what is best for you, princess. But I do believe that growth comes from understanding, and understanding comes from dialogue. I want to learn from you, just as I hope you can learn from me." Lyra studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his. "You are unlike any human I have met," she said finally. "Most of your kind are content to follow our protocols, to speak only when spoken to. But you challenge us. Why?" "Because I believe that true diplomacy is not about following rules, but about breaking down barriers," Kale replied. "I believe that we can achieve more together than we ever could apart. But that requires trust, and trust requires honesty." Lyra turned back to the fountain, her fingers trailing through the water. "Honesty is not always easy, Ambassador. Our society is built on tradition, on the belief that emotions are a weakness. To show vulnerability is to invite chaos. Or it could be the key to unlocking your true potential," Kale said gently. "You are more than your title, princess. You are a person, with thoughts and feelings and dreams. And I believe that those things are worth fighting for." Lyra was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the water. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are a dangerous man, Ambassador Arvidsson. You make me question everything I have been taught." Kale smiled. "Then perhaps I am doing my job." Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "Very well. I will give you a chance to prove yourself. But know this, if you fail, you will be banished from Zorith, and your people will never be welcome here again." Kale nodded, his expression serious. "I understand. And I accept your challenge." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile, the first genuine expression Kale had seen from her. "Then let us begin." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Kale immersed himself in Zorathian culture. Lyra guided him through the city, showing him the ancient temples and bustling markets. She introduced him to the scholars and artisans, the scientists and philosophers. Kale listened intently, asking questions and sharing his own experiences. He was determined to understand the Zorathians, not just as a society, but as individuals. But the true test came when Kale was invited to attend a council meeting, where the Zorathian leaders would decide whether to form an alliance with Earth. The council chamber was a grand hall, its walls lined with towering statues of past emperors. The council members sat in a semicircle, their faces stern and unyielding. Kale stood before them, his heart pounding in his chest. "Ambassador Arvidsson," the council leader intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have been given the opportunity to speak on behalf of your people. Choose your words carefully." Kale took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew that this was his moment, his chance to prove that humanity was worthy of the Zorathians' trust. He began to speak, his voice steady and confident. "Honored council members," he said, "I stand before you not just as a representative of Earth, but as a fellow seeker of truth. We are two very different species, with different histories and different ways of life. But we share a common goal, to create a better future for our people. Earth has faced many challenges in its history. We have known war and strife, but we have also known peace and prosperity. We have learned that progress comes not from isolation, but from collaboration. We have learned that the greatest strength lies in our diversity, in our ability to learn from one another. I believe that an alliance between our worlds would be a step toward a brighter future. Together, we can achieve greatness. Together, we can overcome any obstacle. But this alliance must be built on trust, on a willingness to understand and respect one another. I ask you to look beyond our differences, to see the potential for what we can achieve together. I ask you to take a chance on us, as we are willing to take a chance on you." The chamber fell silent as Kale finished speaking, the council members exchanging glances. Lyra, who had been standing at the edge of the room, stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Ambassador Arvidsson," she said, her voice calm. "Your words are compelling, but words alone are not enough. If you wish to prove your sincerity, you must pass one final test." Kale nodded, his heart pounding. "What is the test?" Lyra's eyes met his, a flicker of emotion in their depths. "You must face the trial of the ancients," she said. "A challenge that will test not just your strength, but your character. If you succeed, you will have proven yourself worthy of our trust. If you fail..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Kale understood the stakes. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. "I accept," he said, his voice steady. "I will face the trial of the ancients." Lyra nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Then prepare yourself, Ambassador. The trial begins at dawn." The trial of the ancients was a test unlike any Kale had ever faced. It was held in the heart of the Zorathian wilderness, a vast expanse of jagged mountains and dense forests. The trial was said to be a journey of self-discovery, a test of one's courage, wisdom, and resilience. Kale was given no instructions, no map, no guidance. He was simply told to follow the path and trust his instincts. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Kale set out on his journey. The air was crisp and cool, the ground beneath his feet soft and yielding. He walked for hours, his senses alert, his mind focused. The forest was alive with the sounds of alien creatures, their calls echoing through the trees. Kale felt a sense of peace, a connection to the world around him. But as the day wore on, the terrain grew more treacherous. The path narrowed, the ground becoming rocky and uneven. Kale's muscles ached, his breath coming in short gasps. He pushed on, determined to prove himself. He climbed steep cliffs, crossed raging rivers, and navigated through dense thickets. Each step was a test of his endurance, each obstacle a challenge to his resolve. As night fell, Kale found himself at the base of a towering mountain, its peak shrouded in mist. He knew that this was the final leg of his journey, the ultimate test of his strength and determination. He began to climb, his hands gripping the rough stone, his feet searching for purchase. The higher he climbed, the thinner the air became, his lungs burning with each breath. But Kale refused to give up. He thought of Lyra, of the trust she had placed in him. He thought of Earth, of the people who were counting on him. He thought of the future, of the potential for greatness that lay ahead. And he pushed on, his resolve unwavering. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kale reached the summit. The mist cleared, revealing a breathtaking view of the Zorathian landscape. The stars above shone brightly, their light reflecting off the crystalline ground. Kale felt a sense of triumph, a deep satisfaction that he had proven himself. But the trial was not yet over. As Kale stood at the summit, a figure emerged from the mist. It was Lyra, her expression calm and serene. She approached him, her eyes meeting his. "You have done well, Ambassador Arvidsson," she said, her voice soft. "You have proven your strength, your courage, your resilience. But there is one final test." Kale nodded, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Lyra reached out, her hand brushing against his. "The final test is one of trust," she said. "You must trust me, as I have come to trust you." Kale felt a surge of emotion, a deep connection to Lyra that he couldn't explain. He took her hand, his grip firm. "I trust you," he said, his voice steady. Lyra smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Then the trial is complete," she said. You have proven yourself worthy, not just of our trust, but of our respect. Kale felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had done it. He had passed the trial. But more than that, he had forged a bond with Lyra, a bond that went beyond diplomacy. As they stood together on the mountaintop, the stars shining above them, Kale knew that this was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but he was ready. He had proven himself, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were a blur of activity as Kale and Lyra worked together to finalize the alliance between Earth and Zorith. The Council had been impressed by Kale's performance in the trial of the Ancients, and they were now more willing to consider his proposals. Lyra, too, had become a staunch advocate for the alliance, her icy demeanor thawing as she worked alongside Kale. The negotiations were intense, with both sides pushing for their own interests. But Kale and Lyra were determined to find a middle ground, a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. They spent long hours in discussion, debating the finer points of the treaty, and working to address the concerns of both sides. Finally, after weeks of negotiation, the treaty was ready to be signed. The signing ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of the Zorathian Palace, the same hall where Kale had first addressed the council. The room was filled with dignitaries from both Earth and Zorith, their faces a mix of anticipation and hope. Kale stood at the center of the room, Lyra by his side. They faced the council, their expressions serious. The council leader stepped forward, holding the treaty in his hands. "Ambassador Arvidsson," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "You have proven yourself worthy of our trust. You have shown us that humanity is capable of greatness, and that together, we can achieve more than we ever could apart." Kale nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Thank you," he said. "It has been an honor to work with you, and I look forward to the future we will build together." The council leader turned to Lyra, his expression softening. "Princess Lyra," he said. "You have shown great wisdom and courage in supporting this alliance. Your leadership has been instrumental in bringing us to this moment." Lyra inclined her head, her expression calm. "Thank you," she said. "I believe that this alliance is the first step toward a brighter future for both our worlds." The council leader then turned to the assembled dignitaries, holding the treaty aloft. "Today, we sign a treaty that will unite our worlds in friendship and cooperation. Let this be a symbol of our commitment to peace, to progress, and to the future." With that, the council leader signed the treaty, followed by Kale and Lyra. The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the hall. Kale felt a sense of triumph, a deep satisfaction that he had achieved his goal. As the ceremony concluded, Kale and Lyra stepped out onto the balcony, overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the spires and glass towers. Kale turned to Lyra, a smile on his face. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." Lyra smiled back, her eyes shining.